Hi, David.
Hi, Henrik.
Another LinkedIn Live with Behind the Future. It's great to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, this is the sixth episode. This is it's starting to become a trend now that we do once a month, and it's great to have you here today, of course. And there's a couple of things that we're going to jump into today. And for the ones that haven't watched Behind the Future before, we are fortunate enough to sit down with IT professionals to hear their experience within IT, and then also to better understand how we all can lead change within our organizations and then also in our own lives, of course. And today I'm sitting down with David Helps from Worldpay, and we're going to talk about how to create a successful and sustainable transformation program. And we all know that transformation and change in 2021 should be continuous. It's not just one project and then you are finished, but it's more of a continuous basis as well. So, just as a starting point, David, so could you give us a quick introduction to yourself and yeah, your experience within IT?
Okay, so I'm Dave Helps. I've been working in IT probably since I left university in one shape or form or another. I've got a family of two girls, one boy. Um, my two girls live abroad, so I'm not sure they're trying to tell me something. One in Australia, one in New Zealand, so can't be further away from me. So that's I suppose me and my family. Um, I started in IT, yeah, from university. I studied an engineering degree, and in fact was sort of looking more at the electronic side of the engineering sphere when I first jumped into a job. But my first job was then coding to sort of the hardware chips and got into software and never really sort of looked back. I think that was the right move to switch from the hardware to the software side.
Yeah.
Started in coding development, worked my way up through project management and etc. to finally end up in an architecture role. I think I've been an enterprise architect now probably since its sort of creation in sort of 2000. So yeah, 21 years of being an enterprise architect. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yep. What
I,
kind of oh, sorry, what kind of aspirations did you have when you were working on your degree as well, your first role within IT as well? What type of ambitions did you have? Where did you want it to be when you when you embarked on the IT journey?
um, I didn't think I'd be in architecture. I think it was purely sort of stay within the development world. Um, but as I like solving problems. I think that's one of the things that sort of attract me to architecture, like solving those problems, looking at the bigger picture. And as you've moved up through the sort of senior developer to program management into architecture, just seeing that holistic picture so you can actually see the whole thing from beginning to end is quite appealing. So I suppose it's start
Yep.
small and your sphere grows as you progress through.
Yep. And then, when you embarked on your first kind of meeting with architecture as well, like what was the impression of architecture at that time? Like how was our enterprise architecture perceived, in the early 2000s as well in the 90s?
Yeah, so I think if I start before enterprise architecture, so I suppose back before that, you had system architects or I suppose what would be called domain architects nowadays. So
Mm.
during that sort of initial architecture period, I was within the telecoms, mobile telecoms arena. So it was a very much a fast-moving industry. You had to constantly innovate, constantly drive things
Mm.
forward. And my first sort of job as an architect in that role was working for Orange, which was actually doubling in size every single year. So when you were doing architecture, then you had to be pragmatic and in terms of this is the immediate needs, this is the market demand. You have to hit the mad marketing that sometimes comes through in terms of these are the initiatives we need to achieve to win the market. It's a very competitive market space.
Mm.
And so then with the architecture, you had to have a long-term perspective in terms of where do you need to head so that you're not building something that you've got to backtrack and rework. That's the worst thing is how do you stop that rework if you're going to sort of spend millions painting a wall and then the next architecture move is to knock the wall down.
Yep.
You don't want to waste money knocking the wall down having just spent all the money painting it. So it's
Mm.
trying to identify in your software where are those areas you need to have flexibility, where can you where is it more stable, because I think then that helps you build a good architecture If it's stable and slow moving, that's where you can build your equivalent of a low bearing wall.
Yeah.
Where it needs to be fast moving, you need to be agile, flexible. So you can't be completely agile. You can't be completely constrained. It's knowing where to put those low bearing walls in your software. So
Yeah.
it's supported, it's solid, but you
Yeah.
can also adapt and move where you need to.
And then also, of course, the last couple of years we have like there's been a big focus on alignment between business and IT, and
Yeah,
today every business organization is also an IT organization, and also the same the other way around. Like every business today use technology in one way or another. But
yeah.
how was that alignment? Earlier, like back in the days, also like how was this alignment? How did organizations work? How were they able to create, or how were they struggling to create that alignment of initiating change in general?
Yeah, because I think it's that partnership between the two, the business and IT. Back then, I suppose the danger is always you can be very much embedded in the technology. You like the technology, you build the technology, but unless you know the end users, what they're going to be using it for, what the actual big business problem you're trying to solve, then that becomes the challenge of you're building software that just isn't fit for purpose. And so I think during that whole process, although I've been architecture, one of the things that has always interested me is the method, the approach. So whether it's agile, rapid application development method, the rational unified process, it's always been iterative development. How can you get closer to the business so that they're actually helping you define the requirements as you go to actually come up with a solution? I think those are one of the critical things to having a good solution, is that alignment between the two that you don't always get when, particularly in waterfall. Yeah,
Yeah,
you get your requirements, you go away for a long period of time, you come back, you show it,
exactly.
it's not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
You're in an endless change cycle.
Yeah, you don't present it before it's perfect, but then when it's perfect, it's already too late because something has changed. So that
Yes.
iterative approach is something like, and the lean startup as well, right? Having that lean testing, agile testing, getting feedback from the customers,
Yeah.
time after time, and then making the needed adjustments. I think, and we see this, in my experience as well. Like one of the biggest challenges is that, you know, very often, we're trying to get 100% accurate kind of data foundation to make better decisions, but at the same time kind of you can't always expect to have that. So it's also about how do you kind of create that story around it as well, like the storytelling, right?
Yeah. Yes, and I think that's in most of my recent jobs, and even in the telco space, it's very much a how can you define domains that are based around business capabilities that you can then map onto the application estate is very much key. If you can define those key business capabilities, then that will help drive rationalization, consolidation, gaps in your architecture where you need to buy new things in. So and over the last sort of, I suppose, 20 in that enterprise architecture space, either as involved in a startup, what is the startup? What do we need to build? What are the key objectives? Or it's an application or technology led organization today, or project based organization. How do you switch it to be domain and business capability aligned to do that transformation? Is one of those sort of critical things you find in any transformational program. It
Yeah.
usually is that how do you pivot in the organization to switch between technology or project to
Yeah.
domains and business capabilities.
And if we look at kind of where you are today as well, working with Worldpay as well, and you
Yep.
also mentioned in Orange, right, where growing with 50% year on year, and I think it's the same for Worldpay as well, like growing with mergers and acquisitions. How
Yeah.
is this done today?
Yeah, so the fintech world is a very much, again, a dynamic space. I think that's one of the things I like in a job is that constant changing, constant evolving landscape. And so yeah, in fintech, because you want to be a global player, there's a lot of mergers, acquisitions. You're acquiring new capabilities, new payment methods all the time, and so the challenge then becomes how do you end up how do you start consolidating if you keep on merging, keep on acquiring? At some point, your technical debt is growing, your complexity is growing. You've got to simplify that estate. You've got to rationalize that estate. So that's
Yeah.
very much the sort of transformational program we're going through now. Well, constantly is as you're acquiring new acquisitions or merging with other organisations, you've got to go through that consolidation at some point to maintain your lead in the market.
Yeah. So how has it been the last couple of years? Just because when you joined kind of Worldpay as well, like what was the current status when you joined, and then how had you seen this changed?
Yeah, so I actually joined as during one of those sort of transitions. So
Yeah.
when I was actually interviewed, I was interviewed as WorldPay, as the old WorldPay. On the day I actually joined, it had been bought out by FIS, so it's now WorldPay by FIS. So FIS is now the parent company. It was an acquisition. They have other banking, merchant solutions, and capital markets is the sort of the three lines of business we have. So now we've still got to start integrating how can we get synergies across those lines of business to actually get a better proposition. So not only are you consolidating, is how can you then exploit what we've got across the other lines of business, and that's a constant evolving and changing landscape. So yeah, and we're already looking to sort of acquire more organisations, which is that constant change of
Yeah.
how do you either plug a gap or how do you rationalise an existing capability that you're duplicating.
Yeah. So what do you think are the typical challenges, just based on your experience as well, like when organizations are embarking on these journeys, like especially in the merger and acquisition, right? Because very often, the focus is just as you mentioned,
Yeah.
kind of rationalize, let's say, two sides of an IT function where you might have duplicated applications or you might have overlapping functionalities or capabilities. But what would you say are the biggest challenges? Like, is it the due diligence at the start? Like, where are the challenges when you embark on this?
So the sort of the journey we sort of gone through is we're very much in a sort of domain. Let's define domains. What are the domains that we need to actually have as an organisation? What are the capabilities we need to, as FIS, need to support? So therefore, you can immediately and Ardoq. We actually use Ardoq as our architecture repository. We're analysing the existing platforms to understand where are the business capabilities, what are the domains we need to stand up. Therefore, we can start using the tool and the analysis within the tool to say how many places are we doing the same function. So
Yep.
billing and funding, how many billing and funding platforms have you got? If you've got a CRM platform, how many CRM platforms are in play? Can you start consolidating them? Do they meet a local need? So
Yep.
we're a global player. Do you therefore have one CRM platform for the whole of the globe, or do you have regional based platforms? How do you make those decisions into when do you need to consolidate into a central instance? When do you need to maintain the fact if you've got duplicate
Yep.
instances fulfilling a need in a local presence?
Yep.
Unless you start doing the analysis around how do you do that distribution model, where do you need to start funding, where do you need to start consolidation, is the $64,000 question all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, it's making that shift, right, from
Yeah.
making decisions based on gut feeling, like this is how we've done it in the past when we've done mergers and acquisitions, but more around data, and kind of
Yes.
making that step out there as well, then making it more attainable to the business, and then making sure that you can address that change based on the figures as well.
Yeah, and that is very much a historically, if you're a project or a application led organization, you tend to have people that gravitate to sort of, I suppose you've got almost like little tribes or fiefdoms that is the person that looks after the application. You try and
Yeah.
challenge that application. How do you manage change? Because you suddenly get resistance from the platform you just tagged as being that's the legacy
Exactly.
platform we need to get rid
Yeah.
of. How do you keep those developers engaged, the team that's involved in that, so they can see a transition that this is how they move to the new platform. So when you therefore have a solution saying, okay, we need to introduce something new, there's open banking or something coming along that you need to introduce into the organization, quite often you get a pitch from each of those fiefdoms as to my solution is best, look at all the features I can have, this solution
Yeah.
is best, look at all the features I can have. And you've then got to do a trade-off in terms of which platform gives you the most. Have you got to do both depending on where they
Yeah.
are? But then if you've got two platforms doing the same thing but slightly differently from a customer's perspective, does that create a complexity you don't want to have?
Yeah.
So these are all the dynamics you need to manage. And so as we built up our domain model, Avi's been linking those to business capabilities and applications, you can start putting these metrics in terms of, can you capture where your technical debt is? Can you
Mm.
capture where you need to consolidate, where you need to maintain this diversity?
Yep.
Where you have differences, is that difference a okay because you're servicing two different segments via those applications, or do you need to consolidate because you're presenting this very complex, I've
Mm.
got two APIs to call, which, when do I call which API? How do you
Yep.
consolidate that? And if you've got a repository where you're building a maturity model, a matrix of any as a new tech comes along, so microservices, if I
Mm.
now want to introduce microservices into the landscape, which applications are microservice friendly, which ones are going to be a challenge because they're big monoliths and based on old
Mm.
technology. You can start doing scores and an impact assessment, given that if I want to introduce this technology, where can I respond really, really quickly to create
Yeah.
a good experience? Where am I going to be slower? It will take me some time to get to the point where I get that good experience. You
Mm.
can start working out how you do a trade-off in where you spend your money, how you build up a proposition over time. So it's
Yep.
that balance. It's having the ability to make that balance is the
Mm.
exciting part of the role.
Yeah, and you also mentioned kind of change as well, because we know, having that single source of truth, if you will, but also the ability to communicate change and
Yeah,
communicate weaknesses and impact and risk and the cost, and where you have opportunity migrations as well.
yeah,
But you mentioned change, and we're all people. Even though we work with IT and IT becomes a more central part of the business, it's still the people that is running these businesses, and people are emotional. People are very focused on their own individual objectives, and
yeah.
of course we know that change is difficult. Why do you think change is so difficult, even though we talk about people in IT?
I think it's just it's the unknown, isn't it? If you change something, how is it going to impact? Is my life going to change? How am I? Have I got a job moving forward? All those. As soon as you get change, it's a degree of uncertainty. I suppose the pandemic, case in point, that was a change that we all took a while to accommodate to, just because you suddenly got to change how you do your day to day.
Yeah.
What do you do when you can't go into the office?
Yeah.
How do you need to adapt? All of those things
Yeah.
suddenly make us very unnervy and unsettled, don't they? It's not good.
Yeah, but then let's narrow it into kind of the Kotter model as well, and this is something that
Yes.
we're frequently using ourselves as well. And I think, even though Kotter is not kind of a personal development guru, I think the Kotter model is also good for individual lives as well. But kind of the
Yes.
first step, what he's saying there is, building a burning platform, creating a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
You know, how do you do that?
Well, I think that's one of the sort of seeing change is so difficult. I think that's one of the things that makes the change a little bit more palatable if you're on a burning platform. So I think the actual phrase came from, if you're in Piper Arthur, where you had an oil rig that was actually on fire, you've got to make a decision. Do you stay on the oil rig and burn, or do you jump 100 feet into the sea and possibly drown? What are you going to do? But that suddenly the fact of you've got a burning platform forces you to make a decision, forces you to change. And I'm not saying set your offices on fire so that you force that change, but
Not
how do you
literally.
do how do you do that metaphorically? So that can therefore instill the need for, I can't stay the same, I have to change. I think then when you've got that burning platform, change becomes that little. It's still not necessarily easy because you've got to make some big decisions. Do I jump or do I stay? But at least once you've got a burning platform, it's easier to take people on a journey. And I think that's the thing,
Yeah.
is how do you create that journey? How burn If you haven't got a burning platform, well, there's no incentive to change, then the ability to do the change is that little bit more difficult. So assessing where you are in that life cycle, are you likely to get received quickly and in a yes, we need to do something, or are you going to get the resistance? Is probably that first starting point, just as a measure of how easy is this change going to be. I
Yeah.
think again, you can I think you can use Kotter in two ways. One is to actually help you do a change program. I think the other one is to help you assess how your change program might be. If you haven't adopted it before, you can go through the 8 steps and say, well, where am I in terms of a burning platform? Where am I in terms of having a coalition that helps us achieve the change? It's also a good sort of means by which you can assess how your program, if you're not adopting it,
Yep.
where your challenges might be.
Exactly. And we also mentioned at the start that, going from that water model to more, or kind of waterfall model as well, to more of a kind of capability driven organization. And then one of
Yeah,
the things there kind of that with the burning platform, of course, we know that that is something that is continuous change in 2021. Like, for example, one
yeah,
of our companies that we work with, kind of ordnance survey as well, they talk about the last change, like the last change program, which is just a final program that is meant to be running continuously, right?
yeah,
And for an architecture's perspective, it's also about building that credibility with executive stakeholders as well. So how have you guys done that in regards to building, trust from executive stakeholders and stakeholders around the business to help communicate that burning platform as well?
yeah. I think that's one of the key points is the higher your sponsorship of your change program, having those key people that are engaged and driving it forward either makes your program easier or
Yep.
less easy, more difficult. So fortunately, when we kicked off this sort of the introducing domains, we had two key sponsors, one from the business side, one from the IT side, who championed those initial sort of workshops and drove this is the imperative, this is why we need to do it. I think an example of not doing change well enough is Kodak. Kodak were one of the first people to actually identify the move to digital cameras. I think they invented the first digital camera. But as soon as they realized, once they got going along that change program, they started going back to, well, people will always need film, won't they? Why don't we stick with what we know rather
Yep.
than actually doing the change? And they backed out of the digital camera business and eventually went broke. So having, again, that's one of those burning platforms. If in order to stay competitive, in order to stay current, you've got to constantly evolve, constantly refresh, as particularly if we are doing lots of mergers and acquisitions, having 10, 15, 20 platforms all doing the same things means you've got 20 ways in, you've got 20 ways of doing it, you've got to have 20 funding rounds.
Yep.
Therefore, how do you start consolidating it down? One, keep it simple so it's easy for the customer, it's straightforward for the customer, but also you're not spending 20 times just to get one new feature through the door. You want to build that
Yep.
feature once and it's rolled out across the board. So always doing that analysis is a constant change for us.
Yeah. And then also kind of, we talked about it now indirectly, like, building that guiding coalition. But
Yes.
if we look at the kind of the strategic vision and initiatives that should be running, like how do you go about building that together? Because, we also know that if there's more chefs, there also can be a little bit more mess. So how,
Yes.
I was a bad translation from Norwegian. I don't know how it sounds in English, but
Yeah.
like if you if you build that strategic vision and initiatives, how can you, like, which stakeholders should you have involved, especially when it comes to business stakeholders and IT stakeholders?
And again, I think it depends on the change. One of the later steps is, I suppose, how do you start with small incremental steps to actually keep small wins, keep things going. So, to a certain extent, I think you want when you're doing your initial initiatives, is you probably want to start small and build it up over time. If you try and do it all in one transition, so
Yeah.
for instance, if you're introducing agile, you could jump straight to change the whole organization to scaled agile framework, for instance, and suddenly you've got to change the whole way your whole organization is suddenly doing business. If you change it too much, then do you start you've got to learn new methods, new approach, new ways of moving forward. So I think part of those initiatives are what are bite-sized initiatives that you can start going so you can build up that momentum. So do you start, if you're introducing agile, that's part of your transformation program, do you start with one team, start flushing out what are the processes, what are the reasons why you want to do change. Then once you've got a team that know how to do it, do you then split the team and see the next round of teams so they are used to actually help do that transition? So part of, I think, those strategic initiatives is how do you break the problem down into constantly making change, constantly putting these wins in. So you're building it up. You're building up over time. You're making things. You're making them manageable. You're giving them the win. It's identifying those manageable chunks that keep growing. Yes, they need to grow over time. They need to be more ambitious and move forward. But it's that challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw now that my, sorry for the ones that sent in questions. I was in full screen, so I didn't see the questions. But I see that we have
Okay.
a couple of questions here. So
Okay.
let's
Far
just
away.
let's just fire away with a couple of questions while we're on it. So um, so kind of Navneet Garg, he mentioned something interesting that EA shall establish metrics before the beginning of the program that is outcome based with concrete results, tangible and non-tangible, and measure the end result with those pre-established metrics or KPIs. So we can just quickly touch on this, David. So KPIs, how is this playing a role in a transformation program? If we just think about the Kotter model, kind
Yeah.
of how do we see KPIs in that picture?
I think there's a so always showing this progression. So at the end, you've got sustained acceleration. You've got these continual wins. I think as you're going through, you need to, as you're developing the initiatives, what's the KPIs around this initiative so that you know you're hitting the objective. So how many people are adopting? Where are those? Where are those key points where you suddenly need to focus? So one of the things we're using around our domain model is the maturity of the domain. How quick is it to stand up a new domain? How quickly are people engaging with that domain? Is the domain fully formed? So these are the key performance indicators you can build around that change program to measure how effective your change program is. So yeah,
Yep.
metrics are important in measuring that the success or your failure of your transformation.
We had the first question, which I really which I really love, because I know it's a very difficult question to answer, but it's like, you know when we talk about mergers and acquisitions, right? Expectations is usually different than what reality shows. And there's another
Yes.
thing which is not directly related to IT, but that's
Yeah.
the office politics. And we have heard stories about the ones that scream the loudest. Those are the ones that get their opinions,
Yes.
fulfilled. So how can you make sure that decisions are made based on objective criteria and not office politics? Even though again we are people, so we're always going to have the soft elements in it as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge. That's a nicety with metrics too. So one of the key challenges with us is managing that sort of technical debt. If you've got a highly political environment where they want to do their own thing, I want to maintain my existing platform. Thanks very much. I think you being able to show a trend and using there's two ways you can govern. You can either govern with a stick, so you beat
Mm.
people up and saying you're not building the right thing, but then you've got to have the authority and the means by which you can step in and show that this is the right way forward. Or you can do it by the sort of carrot to say, okay, here is the carrot. If you improve, you are a good citizen. If you're trending and your technical debt is growing, you're a bad citizen. So
Yep.
you can use the fact of peer pressure as a wonderful thing via those metrics to help push people down that route. So it won't necessarily get rid of the politics, but if you can show that politics is getting in the way of the trend, because politics can be used for it's usually in a negative context. If you have
Yeah.
good politics, you can achieve a completely different result. So
Mhm.
being able to show those trends of the technical debt is continually growing, but my platform is strategic. It's moving forward, but your technical debt is growing. Therefore, you're going to be slower. You're adding to this bad citizen status. You can use
Mhm.
peer pressure to actually help that transformation and change program by
Mhm.
identifying. There's a maturity model where you identify how mature you are, but then it's working out where are the pockets of immaturity where rather that you want to try and put a that might then work out where is your next initiative in your change program you need to focus to help that initiative, those areas where you're seeing problems, or this is good behavior, therefore how can you use those people in the organization to help the promotion, the communication around how you can do things better, how things might be
Mm.
improved. So
Yeah.
you can't necessarily do it, get rid of the politics, but you can use the metrics and the KPIs to at least sort of identify where that's having a negative effect.
Yeah, and
Hopefully.
yeah, Navneet is on fire here as well. He says that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Because it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you have a strategy if you don't have the ability to execute and then also get the people with you. Have you seen any kind of examples in your own experience, like working with this type of change initiatives? Like, have you seen any of the things that, or in your experience, what have you seen been challenging? Like, what would you say are the most let me try this again. What would you say are the most frequent challenges that you experience in your own journey with transformation?
Um, can I answer it? So if you, I suppose one of the next points is enlisting a volunteer army, and I
Yeah.
think this is one of the areas where every time you go through this, some steps you think, well, that was really, really easy. It's not going to be a problem in the next organization. That becomes the big stumbling block. Or the thing that was really, really difficult last time, you absolutely sail through this time. And you think, what's the difference between the last time I did it and this next time? You still need to do here's the 20 or 30 steps you might need to go through a change program, but which at which step do you falter, at which step is hard? That's always an interesting challenge. I think with that enlisting a volunteer army, I tend to use the sort of those the adopters curve. So you've got the innovators, you've got the early adopters, you've got the early majority, the sort of late majority, then the laggards. When you're going through that change process, I normally look for the person that's that is open-minded and wants to learn, but they're usually in that sort of late majority peak. They will be the obstacle that will always. Here's all the reasons why you're going to fail. Here's all the reasons why you're not going to succeed. You will always have that person, but if you can find one of those that is if they're an open mind person, they are like gold dust to help you identify what are the challenges the majority are struggling to comprehend, what's not landing with the organization. Because if you can get one of those helping you out building the message, once they actually flip into they're a convert, they're now in the I can get it along. They will be one of your best advocates to help that whole transition process around how do you solve that problem. And because you're always going to encounter resistance to change, I think it's identifying those key people that are yeah, they want to learn, they want to get it, but they're resistant to the whole change because nobody
Yeah.
like there's well not some people embrace change because they're the early
Yep.
adopters, but can you find that one person that will help that transition by identifying where those pitfalls are that are unique to the organization? So again, feeding back to that will spark new initiatives that you need to put into the program to help that
Yeah.
transition and keep it moving.
So it's kind of building those champions in the different parts of the business that will help you
Yeah,
also kind of in many ways kind of help me help you. So if you can help
yeah.
me achieve this, we can then deliver better outputs to you and insights to you as well.
Yeah, I think it's this. Yes, yes, totally. But I think if you pick an early adopter or an innovator to be that advocate, then there'll be there'll be the evangelist that sort of just gets people's backs up because they're just so positive all the time. Where's
Yeah.
that person that's slightly negative that you can work with to help build that message? They will be a much stronger advocate once they flip, and that's the challenge of how do you get
Yeah.
them to flip. Once they flip, they are like gold dust. If you
Yeah.
got one, two, three of those in the program, they will make a huge difference to the outcome
Yeah.
of the overall success of that change program.
But that is actually a very good point, and I can think that that go against kind of human psychology as well, because we like to hear what we're doing well, and we like to hear about all the great things. But just as you said there, if you're able to actually find the people that are objecting to the change, but try to really understand what are those concerns, and then being able to address them in a quick way. So I think, having them on board and really trying to figure out their objectives as well, I think that is actually a very good point.
Yes.
So of course, we have kind of typically we have a Q&A here when there's a lot of good questions, and I see that there's some discussions in the chat as well.
Yeah.
But are there any other questions or reflections in the chat as well? Any questions you would like to ask David in regards to how they work with change at Worldpay? Any other reflections? Feel free to write them in the chat. So yeah, has it been fun, David, to
It
join in the
has.
future? Yeah.
It is good. Yes, enjoy. I've been enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, it's been a good conversation, and I'm just going to read from another comment here as well. Yeah, so definitely in itself, like what was mentioned, a kind of business outcome driven enterprise architecture. That's basically starting with the high level objectives in mind and working closely with both the IT stakeholders, business stakeholders, executive stakeholders, and try to get them interested and involved as early as possible.
Yeah,
Because we have also seen that if you have executive sponsors that drives through this initiative together with you, it's much easier to get the foothold and actually understand how to work with the business and work with the different parts of the organization.
totally.
So have there been any kind of resources or books, or do you have any recommendations, David, that has been valuable for you throughout your career as an IT
Yeah,
professional architect?
I'll just bring up my list. There's a few books that I was sort of I'm going through at the moment, and I refer to quite often. So Team Topology is quite a good book by Matthew Skelton. So in this whole scaled agile evolution, sort of how do you do scaled agile in a domain based world where you're business capability led,
Mm.
you might be structured as application or project based teams. You've got to move to capability based teams. So team topology gives you the different team structures and how you use them and evolve them over time. How do you evolve them from I've got 5 applications, they deliver 3 domains. How do you evolve them to 3 capability based domains? Is what the book helps you sort of identify those different deployment methods. So that's quite good from a I suppose it's how do you do organizational where there's organizational change associated with the change. What
Yeah.
what options are out? That's quite a useful book. Patterns, principles, and practices of domain-driven development is another one that I've used. That's get the author there is Scott Mick. I can't read that; it's too small.
We will also make sure that we share this
I'll put them
afterwards
on the
as well.
list. So yeah,
Yeah.
patterns, principles, and practices of domain-driven design. There's also project to versus project to product by Mick Kirsten is another book that I'm reading through. It's all to do with these sort of transformational programs. How do you do
Yeah.
from one to another? I suppose the reference books I would use. Again, Scaled Agile Framework I use quite a lot as a reference point if you're doing methodology change, because I think there quite often people start with, do I start with essential safe? How do I grow a team to start with? Then how do I move to a more scaled approach? So
Yeah.
if you're going with large scaled agile, then you defining the domains. These are the domains. These define my large systems I want to have. How do I structure the teams around those domains? So
Yeah.
again, what I tend to find when you do domain-driven development is usually is linked to agile transformation or waterfall to agile transformation,
Mm.
and how those two support each other can also be another way of driving change, because it's not just one. You've now combined the burning platform of I need to change how I deliver software. There's a way in which you conceive and structure the software. You put those two together,
Yeah.
and you might have an even stronger program to driving change in the organization.
Yeah. So basically, kind of, translating, the IT technicalities into business value and making sure that you have the business side,
Yes.
on that journey as well. We have another recommendation here, which is more like, I don't know if you've heard about it, but the little book on REST services, and that's also by Kenneth Lang, or yeah, how you say that name. But we will also make sure that we share all these book recommendations after the event,
Yeah.
and then, as always, if there's any follow-up questions on how Worldpay is running their transformation programs. David's experience. Feel free to connect with both myself and David on LinkedIn. And then for our next Behind the Future interview as well, it's going to be a hybrid. We're actually going to do it live from London. We're going to talk to Joe Shannon, the CTO at Ordnance Survey, which I think is going to be very interesting. And then, sorry, last question here from Viljai. We can answer that as well. How do you ensure that architecture remains a key influencer in transformation programs?
Oh, that's a good
Oh,
question.
that's a good question. The $1 million question.
The $1 million question. I think it's you've whatever as an enterprise architect. I think you're interested in everything and nothing at the same time. Whatever, because some things will come into your field of view. They are significant. You do them. They might disappear over time. So whatever causes or impacts the architecture or the business in any shape or form, I think an EA needs to be on it, helping mapping that to the existing. Does this hinder? Does this support? How is it supporting the change moving forward? So as an EA, I think you've got to be always relevant, be seen to be adding value. If you're not adding value, that's always the challenge of when people don't engage an EA is how do you keep that value? How can I add value? Where can we add value? Again, as a team, I think it's the more you can do that as a collective team rather than individuals. How do you collectively make sure that you're adding value to an organization? Again, I think as a practice helps you gain credibility in the organization.
Yep.
Building solutions and helping providing that objective view rather than the sort of subjective gut feel. The more you can get those metrics and trends being built up in the organization to help those critical decisions with empirical evidence and metrics and
Yep.
KPIs is another. I think that's the where you can see value quite quickly if you
Yep.
manage to create those perspectives.
I think this is a great way to end today's interview as well. And I can also see that you got some nice comment from Mark Samuel saying that thanks, Dave. Always good learning from you and good to see you again. That was just the badger. Is that
Yeah,
a is
well,
that a British phrase or just the badger? Is that a
oh yeah, that's the badger. Yeah.
yeah?
So I saw Mark on this on the a previous stream event. I worked with Mark back in Orange. I think it was
Yeah.
Orange, either Orange or Virgin Mobile.
Yeah.
So we go back a long way. So I'll return the compliment. I joined his presentation too.
Great, fantastic. So yeah, again, we are hosting the next Behind the Future event on the 8th of December. It's going to be live, just as you're seeing it now, but it's also going to be a physical event. So more information to come regarding that as well. Again, appreciate all the engagement and comments and the people that tune in today. It's good to hear that it's been valuable for you as well, David. I have had a really good time. I look forward to continuing with change now with the help of the Kotter model, and then try to get try to create some burning platforms to make sure that I can change quickly.
Yeah.
And hopefully, this will not be the last time that you're on the Behind the Future show. So it was great to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Cheers, and yourself.
Thank you.